The Awful Fate of Melpomenus Jones. Melpomenus Jones, a curate, such a dear young man and only 23, simply couldn't get away from people. He was too modest to tell a lie and too religious to wish to appear rude. Now, it happened that he went to call on some friends of his on the very first afternoon of his summer vacation. The next 6 weeks were entirely his own, absolutely nothing to do. He chatted a while, drank 2 cups of tea, then braced himself for the effort and said suddenly, "Well, I think I—" But the lady of the house said, "Oh no, Mr. Jones, can't you really stay a little longer?" Jones was always truthful. "Oh yes," he said, "of course, I can stay." He stayed. Night was falling. He rose again. "Well now," he said shyly, "I think I really—" "You must go," said the lady politely. "I thought perhaps you could have stayed for dinner." "Oh well, so I could, you know." "Then please stay. I'm sure my husband will be delighted." Papa came home. They had dinner. All through the meal, Jones sat planning to leave at 8:30. After dinner, Mama undertook to draw him out and showed him photographs. At 8:30, Jones had examined 71 photographs. There were about 69 more that he hadn't. Jones arose. "I must say good night now," he pleaded. "Say good night," they said. "Why, it's only 8:30. Have you anything to do?" "Nothing." Just then it turned out that the favorite child of the family, such a dear little romp, had hidden Mr. Jones's hat. So Papa said that he must stay, and invited him to a chat. Papa gave Jones the chat, and still he stayed. Papa began to get very tired of Jones and fidgeted, and finally said with jocular irony that Jones had better stay all night. They could give him a shakedown. Jones mistook his meaning and thanked him with tears in his eyes. And Papa put Jones to bed in the spare room and cursed him heartily. After breakfast next day, Papa went off to his work in the city and left Jones playing with the baby, broken-hearted. His nerve was utterly gone. He was meaning to leave all day, but the thing had got on his mind and he simply couldn't. When Papa came home in the evening, he was surprised and chagrined to find Jones still there. The unhappy young man stared wildly for a moment, then wrung Papa's hand, paid him a month's board in advance, and broke down and sobbed like a child. In the days that followed, he was moody and unapproachable. He lived, of course, entirely in the drawing-room, and the lack of air and exercise began to tell sadly on his health. He passed his time in drinking tea and looking at the photographs. His mind was visibly failing. At length the crash came. They carried him upstairs in a raging delirium of fever. The illness that followed was terrible. He recognized no one. At times he would start up from his bed and shriek, "Well, I think I—" and then fall back upon the pillow with a horrible laugh. Then again he would leap up and cry, "Another cup of tea, and more photographs, more photographs!" At length, after a month of agony, on the last day of his vacation, he passed away. They say that when the last moment came, he sat up in bed with a beautiful smile of confidence playing upon his face, and said, "Well, the angels are calling me. I am afraid I really must go now. Good afternoon." The Babus of Nayanjore. One day I took Kailash Babu aside and told him in a whisper, "Thakur Dada, I was at the levee yesterday, and the Chota Lat Sahib happened to mention the Babus of Nayanjore. I told him that Kailash Babu had come to town. Do you know, he was terribly hurt because you hadn't called. He told me he was going to pay you a private visit himself this very afternoon. Anybody else could have seen through this plot of mine in a moment. And if it had been directed against another person, Kailash Babu would have understood the joke. But after all that he had heard from his friend, the government servant, and after all his own exaggerations, a visit from the Lieutenant Governor seemed the most natural thing in the world. He became highly nervous and excited at my news. About midday, when most of our neighbors are at work and the rest are asleep, a carriage and pair stopped before the lodging of Kailash Babu. 2 flunkies in livery came up the stairs and announced in a loud voice, "The Chota Lat Sahib has arrived." Kailash Babu was ready, waiting for him in his old-fashioned ceremonial robes and ancestral turban, and Ganesh was by his side, dressed in his master's best suit of clothes for the occasion. When the Chota Lat Sahib was announced, Kailash Babu ran, panting and puffing and trembling, to the door, and led in a friend of mine in disguise, with repeated salams, bowing low at each step and walking backward as best as he could. He had his old family shawl spread over a hard wooden chair, and he asked the Lat Sahib to be seated. He then made a high-flown speech in Urdu and presented on the golden salver a string of gold mohars, the last relics of his broken fortune. The old family servant Ganesh, with an expression of awe bordering on terror, stood behind with the scent sprinkler, drenching the Lat Sahib, and touched him gingerly from time to time with the otto of roses from the filigree box. After a 10 minutes interview, which consisted chiefly of nodding the head, my friend rose to his feet to depart. The 2 flunkies in livery, as had been planned beforehand, carried off in state the string of gold mohars, the gold salver, the old ancestral shawl, the silver scent sprinkler, and the otto of roses filigree box. They placed them ceremoniously in the carriage. Kailash Babu regarded this as the usual habit of Chota Lat Sahibs. I was watching all the while from the next room. My sides were aching with suppressed laughter. When I could hold myself in no longer, I rushed into a further room, suddenly to discover in a corner a young girl sobbing as if her heart would break. Hitherto I had only looked upon Kusum, the granddaughter of Kailash Babu, as a somewhat worthless commodity in the marriage market, waiting in vain to attract a husband. But now I found, with a shock of surprise, that in the corner of that room a human heart was beating. The whole night through I had very little sleep. My mind was in a tumult. On the next day, very early in the morning, I took all those stolen goods back to Kailash Babu's lodgings, wishing to hand them over in secret to the servant Ganesh. I waited outside the door and, not finding anyone, went upstairs to Kailash Babu's room. I heard from the passage Kusum asking her grandfather in the most winning voice, "Dada, dearest, do tell me all that the Chota Lat Sahib said to you yesterday. Don't leave out a single word. I am dying to hear it all over again." And Dada needed no encouragement. My heart was deeply touched, and tears came to my eyes. I stood there in silence in the passage, while Thakur Dada finished all his embellishments of the Chota Lat Sahib's wonderful visit.